At a convenience store, Frederick Harper's twin daughters, Amara and Nia, discover Zuri, a girl identical to them, collapsed on the sidewalk in exhaustion. Shocked, Frederick discovers a horrifying truth. Zuri is their triplet, hidden by their cousin James's dark plot. As he welcomes Zuri and rescues the other four children, Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom, from a corrupt shelter, Frederick struggles with James's lies and the devastating betrayal tied to his wife's death. A father's love lifts the veil of secrecy, forging a family through courage and redemption. The sun bled orange across the horizon, painting the sleepy town of Willow Creek in hues of fire and shadow. Frederick Harper eased his silver sedan into the cracked parking lot of a corner convenience store, the hum of the engine fading into the evening's quiet hum. In the back seat, his 5-year-old twin daughters, Amara and Nia, chattered over a shared tablet, their dark curls bouncing with every giggle. "Stay close, girls," Frederick called, his voice a warm anchor as he adjusted his glasses and stepped out. The air carried the sharp tang of gasoline and the faint dust of a long, dry summer. Amara unbuckled her seatbelt with a dramatic flourish, her sneakers hitting the pavement first. Nia followed, clutching her sister's hand, their matching blue dresses swaying as they darted toward the store's glass doors. Frederick smiled, his heart catching at the sight of them. So like their mother, Elise, with her radiant brown skin and wide, curious eyes. 3 years had passed since Elise's death, and though the grief had softened, it lingered like a bruise. He shook off the thought, reaching for his wallet, expecting nothing more than a quick stop for snacks before the drive home. But then the girls stopped dead in their tracks, their laughter snuffed out like a candle. Amara's small hand shot out, tugging at Frederick's jacket with urgency. "Daddy, look!" she whispered, her voice trembling. Nia's eyes were wide, fixed on something near the store's entrance. "Who's that?" she added, her fingers tightening around her sister's. Frederick followed their gaze, and the world seemed to tilt. There, slumped against the peeling stucco wall, was a girl, no older than Amara and Nia, her bare feet curled beneath her clothes ragged and stained. Her skin glistened with sweat, her chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. But it wasn't her state that stopped Frederick cold. It was her face, the delicate curve of her jaw, the tight curls framing her forehead, the slightly upturned nose. She was a mirror image of his daughters. Not similar, identical. "Stay here," Frederick said, his voice sharper than intended. He approached the girl slowly, his polished shoes scuffing the pavement. The fluorescent light above buzzed, casting harsh shadows across her features. Up close, the resemblance was even more unnerving. Her eyes, half closed, were the same rich brown as Amara's, her lips parted like Nia's when she slept. "Sweetheart," he said softly, kneeling to her level. "Are you okay?" Her eyelids fluttered, and she stirred, her gaze unfocused but wary. "I'm Zuri," she mumbled, her voice barely a whisper. Her hand clutched a crumpled paper cup, empty save for a few coins. Frederick's throat tightened. She was exhausted, maybe sick, yet there was a quiet strength in her, a spark that refused to flicker out. He pulled a water bottle from his bag and offered it. She hesitated, then took it, sipping slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Daddy," Amara called, her voice small but piercing. "Why does she look like us?" She and Nia had crept closer, ignoring his order to stay back. Their faces were pale, their usual boldness replaced by something fragile. Wonder, fear, or both. Nia tilted her head, her braids swinging. "Is she our sister?" The question hit Frederick like a freight train. His mind reeled, grasping for logic. Elise had given birth to twins. He'd been in the delivery room, counting their cries, holding them as Elise smiled weakly before slipping away. There had been no third child. Yet here was Zuri, a living echo of his daughters. Her presence, a question he couldn't answer. "Maybe she's a cousin," he said, more to himself than the girls, but the words felt hollow. Cousins didn't look this alike. Zuri's eyes flicked to Amara and Nia, and for a moment, her guard softened. "You're twins," she said, her voice faint but clear. "Like me." Frederick's breath caught. Like me. Did she mean she saw herself in them, or was there something more? He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the immediate. Zuri, where's your family? Who takes care of you? She pointed weakly down the street, her arm trembling. Gran, she's at home. Frederick didn't hesitate. Can you show me? We'll get you safe. He scooped her up, her slight frame alarmingly light in his arms. Amara and Nia trailed close, their hands clasped, whispering nervously. The short walk led to a sagging house at the edge of town, its paint peeling like old skin, its porch creaking underfoot. Frederick knocked, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. An elderly white woman answered, her face etched with worry and kindness. Zuri, she gasped, reaching for the girl. I told you not to wander. She introduced herself as Margaret, explaining she'd taken Zuri in 2 years ago after finding her abandoned near a bus stop. She's been sick lately, Margaret said, her voice heavy. I do what I can, but we ain't got much. Frederick studied Zuri, now resting on a worn couch inside, then glanced at his daughters, their faces still locked on her. The resemblance was undeniable, a truth that demanded answers. Margaret, he said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. I need to know if Zuri's my daughter. Will you allow a DNA test? I'll cover all costs and make sure she's cared for. Margaret's eyes softened, but there was a flicker of resignation, as if she'd known this day might come. She ain't mine by blood, she said. If you're her kin, you got a right to know. She nodded and Frederick felt a weight settle over him, not relief, but responsibility. As they left, Amara tugged his hand. Daddy, if she's our sister, can she come home with us? Nia nodded, her eyes bright with hope. Frederick didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was already racing, replaying the night of the twins' birth, the hospital's chaos, the paperwork he'd barely glanced at. Had there been a mistake? A lie? And if so, who had kept Zuri from him? And why? The sedan's engine roared to life, but Frederick's thoughts were louder. Zuri's face, so like his daughter's, was a puzzle piece that didn't fit, a crack in the life he'd built. As Willow Creek's lights faded in the rearview mirror, one truth burned clear. Whatever secrets lay buried, he would unearth them. For Amara, for Nia, and now for Zuri. The air in Frederick Harper's sleek home office was thick with anticipation, the kind that clings to the skin like damp fog. 3 days had passed since the convenience store, since Zuri's face, identical to Amara and Nia, had shattered the fragile order of his world. The Willow Creek sunset bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where Frederick sat, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm. Outside, the twins' laughter echoed from the garden, a fleeting reminder of normalcy. But normalcy was a lie now, and Frederick knew it. Dr. Lena Coleman, his trusted physician, stood before him, her leather case open on the desk. Her face, usually a mask of professional calm, betrayed a flicker of unease. Frederick, she began, her voice steady but weighted. The DNA results are conclusive. She slid a manila envelope toward him, its edges crisp, its contents a ticking bomb. Amara, Nia, and Zuri are identical triplets. Genetically, there's no doubt. The words landed like a thunderclap. Frederick's hand froze midair, hovering over the envelope. Triplets. His mind clawed at the memory of the delivery room 7 years ago. The sterile chaos, Elise's labored breaths, the twin cries that filled his heart before her death stole it away. He'd held 2 babies, counted 2 heartbeats, and signed papers for 2 daughters. A third? Impossible. Yet the truth stared back from Lena's eyes, unyielding and merciless. How? He whispered, his voice a raw scrape. I was there, Lena. There were only 2. Lena hesitated, choosing her words like steps on thin ice. The hospital records from Elise's delivery are incomplete. I checked. There's a gap in the prenatal imaging, and the delivery log is suspiciously brief. Someone might have altered them. Frederick's jaw tightened. Altered. The word carried a sinister edge, a hint of betrayal he wasn't ready to name. Not yet. He tore open the envelope, scanning the genetic markers. Irrefutable proof that Zuri was his daughter, stolen from him by some cruel sleight of hand. His chest ached, not just for Zuri, but for Elise, who died without knowing her third child was out there, alone. "Thank you, Lena," he said, dismissing her with a nod. Alone, he pressed his palms to his face, the weight of the truth threatening to crush him. But there was no time for collapse. Zuri was waiting. Frederick drove to Margaret's crumbling house the next morning, the sedan's hum a stark contrast to the storm in his mind. Margaret met him at the door, her eyes weary but kind. Zuri sat on the sagging couch, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her gaze flickering between hope and fear. "Zuri," Frederick said, kneeling to her level, "you're my daughter. You have two sisters, Amara and Nia. I want you to come home with us if you're ready." Her lips parted, but no words came. Margaret nodded encouragingly, and Zuri's small hand reached for his, a tentative trust that broke his heart anew. The Harper Villa loomed like a glass and marble monument, its grandeur a jarring backdrop for Zuri's arrival. Amara and Nia bounded forward, their excitement uncontainable. "Zuri, you're our sister!" Amara squealed, tugging her toward the living room. Nia offered a crayon, her smile bright. But Zuri froze at the threshold, her bare feet rooted to the polished floor. The chandeliers sparkled above. The plush furniture gleamed, and it all seemed to overwhelm her. She clutched her rabbit tighter, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. Frederick guided her to a guest room, its lavender walls soft and inviting. "This is he said, gesturing to the bed piled with pillows. But that night, he found Zuri curled on the living room sofa, her rabbit pressed to her chest, the bed untouched. The sight gutted him. She'd chosen the hard, familiar discomfort of the sofa over the luxury he offered, a reminder of the life she'd endured, alone, unseen, while he'd raised her sisters in comfort. "I failed you," he whispered, sinking to the floor beside her. "I didn't know." His mind turned to James, his cousin, a former hospital consultant during Elise's pregnancy. James, with his polished charm and calculating eyes, had been too close to the delivery process, too quick to handle paperwork. Frederick had been too grieving to question. Had James known about Zuri? Hidden her? The thought ignited a slow-burning rage. Frederick pulled out his phone and dialed Clara Voss, a private investigator known for her ruthless precision. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "I need you to dig into James Harper. Start with his time at Willow Creek General 7 years ago. Find out what he touched, who he paid, and why." Clara's voice crackled through the line. "You think he's dirty?" Frederick's gaze drifted to Zuri, sleeping fitfully on the sofa. "I think he stole my daughter." The next day, the twins tried to draw Zuri into their world. Amara braided her hair, chattering about their favorite cartoons. Nia shared a coloring book, pointing out her best drawings. But Zuri's responses were quiet, her smiles fleeting. At dinner, she pushed her food around the plate, her eyes fixed on the table. "Do I have to stay here?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Frederick's fork paused. "Only if you want to," he said gently. "But you're part of us now, Zuri. Always." She nodded, but her shoulders remained hunched, as if the weight of belonging was too heavy to bear. That night, Zuri woke screaming, her cries piercing the villa's silence. Frederick rushed to the living room, finding her trembling, her face slick with sweat. "The man with the scar," she gasped, clutching her rabbit. "He was watching me." Frederick's blood ran cold, a scar on his cheek. James. He'd seen that mark, a faint line from a childhood accident, on his cousin's face countless times. "You're safe now," he soothed, pulling her close. But his mind churned. James wasn't just a shadow in her nightmares. He was a threat, real and close. Frederick tucked Zuri back onto the sofa, her breathing steadying as she drifted off. He stood, his fists clenched, the villa's opulence mocking his failure to protect her. The DNA results were a beginning, not an end. Someone had erased Zuri from his life, from Elise's legacy, and James's name loomed like a storm cloud. Frederick didn't know the full truth yet, but he would. For Zuri, for Amara, for Nia, he'd tear down every lie until the pieces fit. The game had changed, and he was no longer just a father. He was a hunter, and the truth was his prey. The Willow Creek dawn broke with a cruel clarity, its pale light slicing through the curtains of Frederick Harper's villa. He hadn't slept, not truly, since Zuri's nightmare had pierced the night. Her words, "the man with the scar," echoing like a warning bell. Now as he stood in his study, the polished wood and leather-bound books felt like a mockery of control. The DNA results lay open on his desk, their stark numbers confirming Zuri, Amara, and Nia as triplets. But the truth wasn't a comfort. It was a wound, raw and bleeding, pointing to a betrayal Frederick could no longer ignore. His cousin James Harper's face haunted him, not the charming smile from family gatherings, but the calculating glint Frederick had glimpsed during Elise's pregnancy. James, a consultant at Willow Creek General, had hovered too close, his offers to handle hospital paperwork too eager. Frederick had been drowning in grief then, blind to the details. Now those details were a lifeline. He picked up his phone, the screen glowing with a message from Clara Voss, his private investigator. "Found something. Call me." Clara's voice was clipped, all business. James had access to the hospital's administrative systems during Elise's delivery, she said. He signed off on changes to her records, including a trust fund in her name, meant for all heirs. Someone rerouted a third of it to an offshore account. Guess who? Frederick's grip tightened. James. Clara's silence was answer enough. There's more, she added. The original birth record listed 3 live births. 18 hours later, it was edited to 2. James's login. Frederick's pulse roared in his ears. James hadn't just hidden Zuri, he'd erased her, stolen her inheritance, her identity, her family. For money. The betrayal cut deeper than grief, a blade twisting in his chest. Find me proof, he said, his voice steel. Emails, payments, witnesses, anything. Clara's reply was grim. Already on it. But Frederick, men like James don't slip up easily. Watch your back. He hung up, the study's silence oppressive. Downstairs, the twins' voices drifted from the kitchen, Amara's chatter mingling with Nia's softer tones. Zuri was absent. Frederick descended, finding her at the dining table, her plate untouched, her eyes fixed on a napkin she'd torn into strips. Amara was braiding her hair, oblivious to her sister's tension. Zuri, you look like a princess, she chirped. Nia offered a crayon drawing of 3 girls holding hands. Zuri's lips twitched, almost a smile, but her gaze remained distant, haunted. Frederick sat beside her, his voice gentle. Bad dreams again? Zuri's fingers stilled, the napkin fragments falling like snow. The man with the scar on his cheek, she whispered. He was outside Gran's window watching. Gran said he was nobody, but I saw him. Frederick's heart lurches. James's scar, a thin, pale line from a boyhood fall, was unmistakable. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to an old family photo. James, smiling, the scar faint but clear. Was it him? He asked, holding the screen to Zuri. Her eyes widened, her breath hitching. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. Him. Frederick's rage surged, a fire he could barely contain. James hadn't just manipulated records, he'd terrorized Zuri, a child, to keep his secret. He can't hurt you now, Frederick said, his hand on hers, but the promise felt fragile. Zuri nodded, but her shoulders curled inward, as if safety was a language she didn't speak. Determined to act, Frederick drove to Willow Creek General, the hospital's sterile halls a grim reminder of Elise's final hours. He demanded Elise's full medical records, his tech mogul status cutting through bureaucratic delays. The clerk, a nervous young woman, handed over a thin folder. This is all we have, Mr. Harper, she stammered. Frederick flipped through it, his stomach sinking. Prenatal scans were missing, and the delivery log was a single page with a smudged signature. Where's the rest? He pressed. The clerk avoided his gaze. Files from that year, some were archived or lost. Lost. The word was a lie, and Frederick knew it. He left, the folder burning in his hand, and called Clara. The hospital's covering something up, he said. Check their archive logs, security footage, anything from the night Elise gave birth. Clara's voice was sharp. If James tampered with records, someone helped him. I'll find them. Back at the villa, Frederick watched his daughters from the garden, where Amara and Nia played tag, their laughter a fleeting balm. Zuri sat apart, her stuffed rabbit in her lap, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting danger. Frederick approached, kneeling beside her. Zuri, you said Gran knew the man with the scar. Did she ever talk about him? Zuri's fingers tightened on the rabbit. She argued with someone on the phone once, she said. I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard her say, you can't keep her from him forever. She sounded scared. Frederick's blood ran cold. Margaret had known something, maybe not the whole truth, but enough to fear James. Had she protected Zuri from him, only to lose her battle to poverty and illness? The thought was unbearable. He hugged Zuri, her small frame trembling against him. You're home now, he said, but the words felt like a vow he hadn't yet earned. That evening, Frederick sat in his study, poring over Elise's old journals, searching for clues. Her handwriting, elegant and precise, spoke of love for the twins, but one entry stopped him cold. James was at the hospital again today. He keeps asking about the trust. I don't trust his smile. Frederick's fist clenched. Elise had sensed it, even then. Had she confronted James? Was that why Zuri was taken? A knock broke his thoughts. The housekeeper, Maria, stood at the door, her face pale. Sir, there's a man outside. He says he's family. Frederick's pulse spiked. He strode to the security monitor, the grainy feed showing a figure at the gate. Tall, polished, a scar faint on his cheek. James. He'd come uninvited, bold as ever. Tell him I'm not here, Frederick said, his voice low, and lock the gates. As Maria hurried off, Frederick's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're digging, Fred. Careful what you find. The threat was clear, James's arrogance unmistakable. Frederick's resolve hardened. He wasn't just fighting for Zuri now, but for Elise's memory, for the truth someone had buried. James thought he could intimidate him, but he'd underestimated a father's love. The shadows of the past were rising, and Frederick would face them, no matter the cost. The Willow Creek night pressed against the Harper villa like a held breath, its silence broken only by the faint hum of crickets. Frederick Harper stood in his study, the glow of his laptop casting stark shadows across his face. Clara Voss's latest report lay open on the screen, its words a map to a darker truth. James, his cousin, wasn't just behind Zuri's disappearance. He was tied to Hope Haven, a so-called shelter on the town's outskirts, suspected of falsifying child records. Frederick's jaw clenched. If James had hidden one child, what else had he buried? The thought drove him forward, a father's fury sharpened by betrayal. Clara's voice crackled through the phone, her tone grim. Hope Haven's a front, she said. James funneled money through it, skimming welfare funds meant for kids. The director, Victor Klein, is his puppet. I've got names of children with no paper trail, ghosts in the system. Frederick's pulse quickened. Ghosts, like Zuri had been. I'm going there, he said, already grabbing his jacket. Tomorrow as a donor. They won't suspect me. Clara's warning was sharp. Be careful, Frederick. Men like Victor don't play clean. The next morning, Frederick drove to Hope Haven, the sedan's tires crunching over gravel as the shelter came into view. A squat, gray building with barred windows and a faded sign promising hope and shelter. The air smelled of bleach and neglect, a thin veil over something rotten. Inside, the lobby was barren, its walls stained, its chairs mismatched. Victor Klein greeted him, a tall man with slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Harper, he said, extending a hand, your foundation's interest is a godsend. The children need you. Frederick forced a nod, his tech mogul charm masking the fire in his chest. I want to see the facility, he said. Victor led him through dim hallways, past rooms where children moved like shadows, their eyes downcast, their voices hushed. The air was heavy, not with laughter, but with fear. In a corner of the common room, 4 children caught Frederick's eye. A girl with tangled curls, another with a wary stare, a third clutching a worn book, and a boy with a protective stance. They were no older than Zuri, their silence a mirror of her own when he'd found her. Who are they? Frederick asked, his voice casual, but his gaze sharp. Victor waved a hand dismissive. Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom. Troubled cases. Orphans, mostly. They're... Slow to adjust. Frederick's stomach twisted. Troubled. The word was a lie, and the children's eyes, locked on Victor, not with trust, but with dread, confirmed it. Lila, the girl with curls, flinched when Victor passed. Maya, the wary one, shrank behind Anna, who clutched her book like a shield. Tom, the boy, stood rigid, his fists balled. Frederick's tour ended with promises of a donation, but his mind was elsewhere. That night he called Clara. "Those kids aren't safe," he said. "I saw it in their faces. We need to act." Clara's plan was bold. Pose as inspectors from Child Protective Services, armed with forged credentials, to demand records and access. "If Victor's hiding something," she said, "we'll find it. But we move fast." 2 days later, Frederick and Clara returned to Hope Haven, their fake IDs flawless. Victor's smile faltered as Clara presented their mandate. "Routine inspection," she said, her voice cold. "Show us the files." Victor hesitated, then led them to a cluttered office, its cabinets stuffed with folders. Frederick scanned the documents while Clara distracted Victor. The records for Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom were thin, vague custody transfers. No medical history, no school enrollment. One note caught his eye. Funds allocated for child welfare, redirected to admin. James's signature was scrawled at the bottom. Frederick's blood boiled. These children weren't just neglected. They were pawns in James's scheme. Their lives erased to line his pockets. He slipped a folder into his jacket, his heart pounding. Clara's signal, a sharp nod, meant it was time to push. "We need to speak to the children," she said. Victor's face hardened. "They're not up for it." Frederick stepped forward, his voice low. "You don't have a choice." In a small room, the 4 children sat, their eyes wary but curious. Frederick knelt, his voice soft. "I'm Frederick. I want to help you. Can you tell me about this place?" Lila glanced at Tom, who shook his head. Maya whispered, "We're not supposed to talk." Anna's grip on her book tightened. Frederick's heart sank, but he pressed gently. "I know someone like you. Her name's Zuri. She was scared too, but she's safe now." Lila's eyes widened. "Zuri? She shared her bread with me once." The connection hit Frederick like a spark. Zuri had known Lila on the streets, a fleeting bond forged in survival. He made a decision. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice firm. Victor protested, but Clara's forged authority silenced him. With Child Protective Services alerted, Frederick drove the children to his villa, their silence heavy, but their bodies less tense with every mile. At the villa, Zuri met them at the door, her cup of tea trembling in her hands. Her eyes locked on Lila, and without a word she stepped aside, letting them in. The moment was quiet but profound, a recognition of shared pain. Amara and Nia, wide-eyed, hovered nearby. "Are they staying?" Nia asked. Frederick nodded. "For now. They need us." Lila clutched Zuri's old book, a gift she'd offered, her first step toward trust. That night James struck back. Released on bail after a minor charge tied to Hope Haven, he appeared on local news, his scar glinting under studio lights. Frederick Harper kidnapped vulnerable children, he claimed, holding up forged documents. He's abusing his wealth to play savior. The headlines erupted. Tech mogul steals kids. Reporters swarmed the villa, their cameras flashing like vultures circling prey. Frederick's phone buzzed with board members' demands, his company teetering under the scandal. He stood in the garden, watching Zuri, Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom sit together, their faces lit by moonlight. Amara and Nia joined them, their laughter a fragile defiance. Frederick's resolve hardened. James thought he could break him with lies, but he'd underestimated the strength of a father's love. The folder in his jacket, proof of James's embezzlement, was a weapon, and Frederick would wield it. Hope Haven was just the beginning. The truth was out there, and he'd burn down every secret to find it. The Willow Creek sky hung heavy with storm clouds, their gray weight mirroring the turmoil in Frederick Harper's heart. The villa, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fortress under siege, its marble halls echoing with the distant clamor of reporters camped beyond the gates. James's televised accusations, branding Frederick a kidnapper, had ignited a firestorm, threatening his company, his reputation, and the fragile safety he'd built for Zuri, Amara, Nia, Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom. But Frederick wasn't breaking. In his study, the stolen folder from Hope Haven lay open, its pages a map of James's crimes, forged records, siphoned welfare funds, and a signature that tied his cousin to Zuri's erasure. The truth was close, and Frederick would claw it free. Clara Voss's latest report had landed like a grenade. James didn't just hide Zuri, she said over a secure line, her voice taut. He bribed a nurse, Evelyn Hart, to falsify Elise's birth records. She's ready to talk, but she's scared. Meet her tonight. Neutral ground. Frederick's grip on the phone tightened. Evelyn Hart, a name from the hospital, a shadow from the night Elise died. Where? He asked. Clara named a quiet cafe on the edge of town, far from prying eyes. And Frederick, she added, James knows you're digging. He's not running, he's fighting. The cafe was a dim haven of worn booths and flickering lights, its patrons too weary to notice the man in the corner booth. Frederick arrived early, his tailored coat out of place among the chipped mugs and grease-stained menus. Evelyn Hart slipped in 10 minutes later, her face gaunt, her eyes darting like a hunted animal's. Mr. Harper, she whispered, sliding into the seat opposite. I didn't want to do it. James said it was for the best. Frederick leaned forward, his voice low but unyielding. What did he make you do? Evelyn's hands trembled as she spoke. The night Elise gave birth, there were 3 babies. I saw them. 3 girls, healthy, crying. James came after, said the 3rd was sickly, better off elsewhere. He paid me to change the record to 2 live births, 1 stillborn. There was no stillborn. He took her, Zuri. Frederick's breath caught, rage and grief colliding. Why? He demanded. Evelyn's voice cracked. The trust fund. It was split for all heirs. James wanted the 3rd share. He said Elise would never know. Frederick's fists clenched under the table. James hadn't just stolen Zuri. He'd profited from her absence, turning a child into a transaction. Did Elise suspect? He asked. Evelyn nodded, tears spilling. She asked about the 3rd baby before she died. I lied to her. I'm sorry. The words cut deep, but Frederick held her gaze. Help me make this right. Testify. Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. I will, but James, he's dangerous. Back at the villa, Frederick found Zuri in the living room, sketching on a scrap of paper. Her drawings were stark, black stick figures, one with a jagged scar on its cheek standing outside a house. That's him, she said, her voice small. The man who watched Gran. Frederick's heart twisted. Zuri's nightmares weren't just fears. They were memories. James's shadow looming over her childhood. He knelt beside her, his voice steady. He won't come near you again, I promise. But promises felt fragile as James's attacks grew bolder. The media storm intensified, with tabloids splashing Frederick's face alongside headlines like Mogul's kidnapping scandal. His board demanded a response, their faith in him wavering. Frederick ignored them, focusing on the children. Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom were settling in, their guarded eyes softening as Amara and Nia drew them into games. Zuri, though, remained cautious, her sofa a fortress. When Nia offered her a glittery dress, Zuri shook her head. I don't want to stand out, she said, her voice barely audible. Frederick's resolve hardened. He needed to confront James, not just for Zuri, but for all of them. Clara arranged a meeting at a neutral office downtown, a sterile space with glass walls and no witnesses. James arrived late, his scar glinting under fluorescent lights, his smile ablaze. Fred, he said, leaning back in his chair, you're making a mess. Kidnapping kids? Not a good look. Frederick's voice was ice. I know what you did. The trust fund, the records, Zuri. Evelyn's talking. James's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed. You always wanted the perfect family, he taunted. Now you've got a scandal. Drop this, or it gets worse. Frederick slid a recorder across the table, its red light blinking. The trust was mine to manage, James had said earlier, a slip Clara had caught on tape. It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough to rattle him. You're done, James, Frederick said, standing. I'm coming for you. James laughed, but it was hollow. You're out of your depth, cousin. As Frederick left, his phone buzzed. A photo from an unknown number, showing Zuri, Amara, and Nia playing in the villa's garden, taken from outside the fence. The message read, "Back off." Frederick's blood ran cold. James wasn't just fighting, he was watching. At home, Frederick tightened security, installing cameras and hiring guards. He sat with Dr. Sarah Miles, a child therapist, who reviewed Zuri's drawings. Her fear is real, Sarah said. This scarred man is a trauma anchor. She needs stability to heal. Frederick nodded, but stability felt like a luxury. He gathered the children in the living room, their faces a mix of trust and uncertainty. You're safe here, he said, his voice firm. No one will take you away. Lila's eyes met his, hopeful but wary. Tom's hand rested on Anna's, protective. That night, Frederick sat in his study, Elise's journals open before him. One entry burned. James asked about the trust again. He's too interested. Elise had seen it, her instincts sharper than his. Had she confronted James? Was that why Zuri was taken? And why Elise died? The thought was a knife, but Frederick pushed it aside. He had Evelyn's testimony, Clara's evidence, and a recording. James's empire of lies was crumbling, but he was dangerous in his desperation. Frederick's fight wasn't just for justice now. It was for survival. The past was a shadow, but he'd drag it into the light, no matter the cost. The Willow Creek dawn was a bruised purple, its light barely piercing the storm clouds that mirrored the chaos swallowing Frederick Harper's life. The villa, once a beacon of order, now stood like a lighthouse battered by waves, its gates swarmed by reporters hungry for scandal. James's lies, labeling Frederick a kidnapper, had slashed his reputation, his company teetering as clients fled and board members whispered of betrayal. But Frederick's resolve was iron. In his study, Evelyn Hart's testimony in the stolen Hope Haven folder burned with truth. James had stolen Zuri, profited from her absence, and now aimed to ruin Frederick's empire. The storm was here, and Frederick would meet it head-on. James's latest move was a dagger. He'd filed an injunction to reclaim Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom, claiming Frederick had no legal right to them. His motive wasn't justice, but sabotage, crippling Frederick's business by painting him as a predator. The media devoured it, headlines screaming, "Harper's House of Stolen Children." Frederick's phone buzzed with threats from investors, but he ignored them, his focus razor sharp. Clara Voss, his investigator, stood by his desk, her voice urgent. James's injunction is a trap, she said. He's pushing for a public hearing to keep the pressure on. We need to hit back with everything. Evelyn's statement, the embezzlement proof. Frederick nodded, his eyes on a photo of Zuri, Amara, and Nia, their smiles a lifeline. Get it to my lawyer, he said, and keep digging. James isn't working alone. Clara's gaze was steely. I'm on it, but he's got friends in high places. This won't be quiet. Quiet was a memory now. Frederick was fighting for 7 children, for Elise's legacy, for a truth that refused to stay buried. The courtroom loomed like a coliseum, its oak benches packed with journalists and gawkers craving drama. Frederick sat beside his attorney, Elena Navarro, his face a mask hiding the fire within. Across the aisle, James's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Carla Reed, smirked, oozing confidence. The judge, a stern man with silver hair, called the room to order. Mr. Harper, he said, you stand accused of unlawfully removing children from Hope Haven. Explain your actions. Frederick took the stand, his voice clear, unwavering. I didn't steal them, he said, his eyes sweeping the room. I saved them from a place where they were neglected, where their lives were erased for profit. Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom deserve better. So did my daughter, Zuri. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elena presented evidence. Evelyn's sworn statement, financial audits showing James's embezzlement, and psychological reports from Dr. Sarah Miles detailing the children's trauma under Victor Klein's care. Lila's testimony, delivered in a small but steady voice, sealed it. Mr. Harper gave us a home. Hope Haven gave us fear. James's lawyer countered, waving forged documents and painting Frederick as a power-hungry mogul. But the judge, moved by the children's words and the weight of evidence, ruled in Frederick's favor. granting temporary custody. The gavel's crack was a victory, but Frederick knew the war wasn't over. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouting questions. He faced them, his voice steady. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about kids who deserve to be seen, heard, protected. James Harper wants chaos. He'll face consequences." Back at the villa, the children sensed the tension. Zuri lingered on her sofa, her stuffed rabbit a shield. Amara and Nia tried to cheer her, offering cookies, but her eyes stayed wary. Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom huddled close, their trust in Frederick growing but fragile. He gathered them in the library, kneeling to their level. "You may hear my name on the news," he said gently. "People will say things that aren't true, but you're safe here. I'll fight for you." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "Will they take us back?" Frederick shook his head. "Not while I'm here." Tom's hand gripped Anna's, a silent vow. That night, as thunder rumbled outside, Frederick's phone pinged with an anonymous email, its subject line chilling. "Elise didn't die naturally." His heart stopped. Attached were hospital logs showing an overdose in Elise's post-delivery medication, a sedative incompatible with her condition, enough to trigger cardiac arrest. The logs were time-stamped hours after Zuri's birth, accessed by an admin account linked to James. Frederick's hands shook. Had James silenced Elise to protect his scheme? The thought was a wound, raw and deep. He forwarded the email to Clara and the FBI, his resolve hardening into something fierce. Clara called within the hour. "This is dynamite," she said. "The FBI is already sniffing around James for Hope Haven. This ties him to murder, but we need more. Witnesses, footage." Frederick's voice was low, dangerous. "Find them. I want him buried." He hung up, staring at Elise's photo on his desk, her smile a ghost of what he'd lost. She'd suspected James, her journal entries clear. He's too interested in the trust. Had she confronted him, only to pay with her life? The storm broke at midnight, rain lashing the villa's windows. Frederick sat with Dr. Sarah Miles, who'd come to check on the children. "Zuri's drawings are worse," she said, showing sketches of the scarred man, his eyes like voids. "She's reliving trauma. The others are scared too. Lila won't sleep alone. Maya flinches at loud noises." Frederick's chest ached. "What do they need?" Sarah's answer was simple. "You, keep showing up." He nodded, but the weight of James's threat, "Back off," loomed large. Downstairs, the children slept in a makeshift fort of blankets, Zuri's sofa at its heart. Frederick watched them, their faces soft in the lamplight. Amara's hand rested on Nia's, Lila's on Maya's, Anna's on Tom's, a chain of trust he'd die to protect. But James wasn't done. A news alert flashed on his phone. Harper faces new probe over shelter funds. James had leaked false claims, tying Frederick to Hope Haven's corruption. The board called an emergency meeting, demanding he step down. Frederick's fists clenched. James wasn't just attacking his business. He was targeting his soul. But he had weapons. Evelyn's testimony, the overdose logs, the children's voices. He called Elena. "File a countersuit," he said. "Defamation, fraud, anything that sticks. We're not hiding." Elena's voice was calm. "It's a war now, Frederick. Are you ready?" He looked at the children, their breathing a quiet defiance. "I've been ready since I found Zuri." The rain pounded harder, but Frederick stood tall. James thought he could break him, but he'd miscalculated. The storm was fierce, but Frederick was fiercer. A father, a protector, a hunter. The truth was a blade, and he'd wield it until James's lies bled out. For Elise, for Zuri, for every child under his roof, the fight was just beginning. The Willow Creek night was a shroud, its darkness split by jagged lightning as rain hammered the Harper villa. Frederick Harper stood in his study, the weight of the anonymous email. Elise didn't die naturally, searing his soul. The hospital logs, now in the FBI's hands, pointed to a chilling truth. James, his cousin, hadn't just stolen Zuri and profited from her absence. He'd likely murdered Elise to silence her suspicions. The evidence was a noose tightening around James's neck. But Frederick knew a cornered predator was most dangerous. For Zuri, Amara, Nia, Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom, he'd end this, no matter the cost. Clara Voss's voice crackled through the phone, urgent and sharp. The FBI raided James's office, she said. They found a hidden drive, emails, bank transfers, and a recorded call. It's him, Frederick. He's done. The call, Clara explained, was between James and Victor Klein, dated days after Zuri's birth. James's voice, cold and precise, had said, Elise asked too many questions. The sedative was clean. No one will trace it. The third kid's gone. Trust's mine. Frederick's stomach churned. The confession was a blade, cutting through years of lies. Where is he asked, his voice low, lethal. Fled, Clara replied. But the FBI's tracking him. Border Patrol's on alert. He won't get far. Frederick hung up, his gaze falling on a photo of Elise, her smile a beacon in the storm. She'd known James was dangerous, her journal a warning he'd ignored. Now her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a crime, and James would pay. The next morning, the villa buzzed with quiet tension. Zuri sat on her sofa, sketching the scarred man with trembling hands. Amara and Nia flanked her, their chatter subdued, sensing the shift. Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom lingered nearby, their eyes darting to Frederick as he entered. Is something wrong? Lila asked, her voice small. Frederick knelt, his voice steady. We're close to making things right, he said. You're safe, but I need you to trust me. Tom's jaw tightened, but he nodded, his hand on Anna's. Frederick met with Elena Navarro, his lawyer, in the library. The FBI's building a case, she said, spreading documents across the table. Conspiracy, fraud, child endangerment, and now murder. Evelyn Hart's testimony ties James to Zuri's abduction, and the sedative logs point to Elise's death. Frederick's fists clenched. How soon can they arrest him? Elena's eyes were grim. They need him in custody first. He's slippery, but the net's closing. The wait was agony. Frederick kept the children close, their routines, drawing, reading, games, a fragile shield against the chaos. Zuri's nightmares worsened, her cries waking the house. Dr. Sarah Miles, the therapist, visited daily, her voice calm but firm. Zuri's trauma is resurfacing, she said, showing Frederick a new drawing. The scarred man, his face a void, holding a baby. She's processing what James did. Keep her grounded. Frederick nodded, but guilt gnawed at him. He'd brought Zuri home, but hadn't yet freed her from James's shadow. At dusk, Clara called with news that stopped his heart. They got him, she said. James tried crossing into Mexico. Border Patrol nabbed him. He's in custody, talking to save his skin. Frederick exhaled, relief laced with rage. What did he say? Clara's voice hardened. Everything. He admitted bribing Evelyn to erase Zuri's birth record, taking her to silence Elise's suspicions. The trust fund was his motive. Millions, siphoned to offshore accounts. When Elise asked about a third baby, he dosed her with a sedative, knowing it'd kill her. Frederick's knees buckled, and he sank into a chair. James hadn't just stolen Zuri. He'd murdered Elise to protect his greed, her death a calculated erasure to match Zuri's. The confession was a victory, but it tasted like ash. He's going down, Clara said. The FBI is charging him with murder, kidnapping, and fraud. It's over. But it wasn't, not until Frederick faced him. The next day, he visited James in a stark holding cell, the air thick with antiseptic and defeat. James sat cuffed, his scars stark under harsh lights, his charm replaced by a hollow smirk. Fred, he said, voice dripping venom, you think you've won? You're still the fool who didn't see it. Frederick's voice was ice. You killed my wife. You stole my daughter. For money. James shrugged, unrepentant. Elise was weak. Zuri was a liability. The trust was mine by right. Frederick leaned close, his eyes burning. You're nothing now, and they're everything. He left, James's laughter echoing, but it was empty. The FBI's case was ironclad. Evelyn's testimony, the recorded call, bank records, and hospital logs. James faced life without parole, his empire of lies reduced to dust. Frederick returned to the villa, his heart heavy but resolute. He gathered the children in the garden, the storm's remnants glistening on the grass. It's done, he said, kneeling. The man who hurt us, he's gone. You're free. Zuri's eyes searched his, her voice a whisper. You found me. Frederick pulled her close, tears falling. I'll always find you. Amara and Nia joined, their arms encircling Zuri, Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom. The 7 children, once scattered by cruelty, were a family now, bound by Frederick's love. But the cost, Elise's life, Zuri's lost years, hung like a shadow. Frederick channeled his grief into action. He founded the Elise Foundation, a nonprofit to protect vulnerable children, its mission carved in stone. No child forgotten. The villa became its heart, a place where Zuri's drawings turned brighter, where Leela laughed, Maya spoke, Anna read aloud, and Tom played without fear. Amara and Nia, once wary of Zuri, now called her sister with pride, their bond a quiet miracle. That night Frederick sat alone, Elise's journal open. Her final entry read, "If anything happens, protect our girls." He'd failed her then, but not now. The foundation was her legacy, a light born from darkness. He stepped outside, the stars piercing the cleared sky. "I did it, Elise," he whispered. "They're whole." The wind carried his words, a promise kept. But James's confession left scars. Zuri still flinched at shadows, her trust hard won. The other children bore their own wounds, their healing a journey. Frederick knew the fight wasn't over, not for justice, but for their hearts. He'd face it as he'd faced James with a father's unyielding love. The truth, finally free, was a flame, and Frederick would guard it, for Elise, for his daughters, for every child he'd sworn to save. The Willow Creek spring unfolded like a tender promise, its golden light weaving through the Harper Villa's sprawling garden, where sunflowers now bloomed in defiant rows. A year had passed since James's arrest, since the truth about Zuri's abduction and Elise's murder had torn Frederick Harper's world apart and rebuilt it stronger. The villa, once a cold monument of wealth, pulsed with life, children's laughter, scattered shoes, and the soft hum of music from the kitchen. Frederick stood on the patio, no longer in tailored suits but in a faded sweater, watching 7 children weave through the grass, their joy a quiet victory over the shadows of the past. Zuri, Amara, and Naya darted among the sunflowers, their curls bouncing, their giggles a melody that soothed Frederick's scarred heart. Lila, Maya, Anna, and Tom trailed close, their once guarded eyes now bright with trust. The Elise Foundation, born from Frederick's vow to honor his late wife, had transformed the villa into a haven for vulnerable children. Its mission, no child forgotten, etched above the entrance. Zuri's drawings, once stark with the scarred man's menace, now burst with color, pinned to every wall. Yet beneath the warmth, Frederick knew healing was a journey, not a destination. The children gathered on a checkered blanket, their faces flushed from play. Zuri, no longer tethered to the living room sofa, sat cross-legged, braiding Amara's hair with steady hands. Nia guarded a small, weathered box half buried in the flower bed, her voice sharp. "Careful, Zuri. It's old, not a toy." Zuri chuckled, a sound Frederick once thought impossible. "It's not a bomb, Nia." Lila, clutching a daisy, glanced at Frederick, who watched from a nearby bench. "Do you know who buried it?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Frederick's smile was wistful. "Zuri, I think. Or maybe Margaret helped. It's been waiting for the right moment." The mention of Margaret, Zuri's guardian who'd shielded her from James's reach, hung heavy. She'd passed before seeing Zuri's new life, but her love lingered in every choice Frederick made. With a wooden stick, the children pried open the box, revealing faded treasures, drawings of 3 girls in dresses, a tall man with kind eyes, and 2 women, one radiant, one gentle, watching from a crayon sky. "That's Mommy," Zuri whispered, touching Elise's figure. "And Gran," Amara added, her voice thick. Nia's eyes glistened. "They were with us the whole time." Frederick joined them, pulling the children close, his tears silent but unashamed. The drawings were a bridge to a past reclaimed, a testament to Elise and Margaret's unyielding love. "They still are," he said, his voice a vow. The moment held them, time pausing as the breeze carried their shared grief into something softer. A garden where wounds grew into hope. But the past wasn't gone. It was a root, grounding their fragile joy. Inside, the kitchen glowed with evening's warmth, strawberries staining the counter as Frederick and the children prepared lemonade. Zuri, now comfortable in a bright dress, poured with care, while Lila and Maya giggled, sneaking sips. Anna read aloud from a book, her voice clear, and Tom, once so protective, danced with Nia to a radio tune. Frederick's heart swelled, but a letter on the counter stopped him cold. It was Margaret's, found in the box, its handwriting precise. To my girls, love writes its own DNA. Elise gave you life. I kept it safe. Be fierce. Be kind. A second letter addressed to him read, Frederick, you're their father in every way. Let love lead. He choked back a sob, the words a lantern in his darkness. Margaret had known Zuri's truth, had fought James's shadow with quiet courage. Her legacy wasn't just Zuri's survival, but this family, stitched together by choice and sacrifice. Frederick tucked the letters away, vowing to honor them. The Elise Foundation had already saved hundreds, its shelters and programs a shield for the invisible. But here, in this kitchen, the real work lived, mending 7 hearts, one day at a time. Night fell gently, the children climbing into bed after stories and hugs. Zuri, no longer on the sofa, shared a room with Amara and Nia, her bed a testament to her trust. Lila and Maya bunked together, Anna and Tom nearby, their whispers a soft hum. Frederick lingered at their doorway, moonlight spilling across a framed drawing from the box, redrawn in vibrant hues. Elise stood in green, Margaret in violet, the 7 children hand in hand, Frederick beside them, his hand on his heart. It wasn't art for galleries, but to him it was a masterpiece of survival. He kissed each child's forehead, Zuri, Amara, Nia, Lila, Maya, Anna, Tom, whispering promises now free of fear. Outside, the garden sang with crickets, and in their song, Frederick heard Elise and Margaret, their presence not lost but transformed, into memory, protection, joy. The villa no longer echoed with silence, but pulsed with belonging, a home forged through fire. Frederick returned to the garden, settling on the bench, the stars above like scattered embers. He held Margaret's letter, its final words a beacon. Let love grow wild. His hands trembled, not with grief, but gratitude. Thank you, he whispered, the breeze carrying his words to the women who'd shaped him. Elise's smile, Margaret's strength, they lived in Zuri's courage, Amara's warmth, Nia's spark, Lila's hope, Maya's voice, Anna's dreams, Tom's resilience. The past was a scar, not a chain. Zuri still flinched at shadows, her healing slow but steady. Lila woke from nightmares, Maya shied from crowds, Anna clung to books, Tom scanned for threats. But they laughed, they played, they trusted. A miracle Frederick never took for granted. He'd sold 1/3 of his company, the proceeds seeding the foundation, his wealth now measured in their smiles, not bank accounts. Boardrooms had faded, bike rides and pancake mornings were his empire. As dawn crept near, Frederick stood, the sunflowers nodding in the breeze. The children's laughter would soon fill the air, a song of survival. James's shadow was gone, his life sentence a faint echo. The Elise Foundation grew, its reach a testament to love's power. But the true legacy was here, 7 children once broken, now whole. Frederick had fought for them, not as a mogul, but as a father, and in their eyes he saw Elise, Margaret, and a future reclaimed. Love, fierce and unyielding, was their inheritance, and no one would take it away again. Did Frederick and his children's journey touch your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words mean everything to us. Thank you for joining this story of love, truth, and redemption, crafted with care for you. If it moved you, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for more heartfelt tales. We can't wait to see you in the next one.